statutory right to strike, the employer can permanently replace you. So some right, that is, a right where you lose your job for exercising it if the employer so decrees. The other big thing on the front of concerted activities is that unions are outright prohibited from even requesting workers to act in solidarity with other workers. For example, one company's on strike producing, say, tires. Another company, union workers there assembling, putting the tires on rims. If those union workers in the second company are asked not to put those scab tires on rims, that's flatly illegal under the National Labor Relations Act. And the act as it's presently set up is designed to focus the effective remedies against the unions and not against violations of the workers' rights. So that's the crisis that we're in. The right to strike is withering away. Most workers, it's simply not an effective option anymore. The strong unions can't help the weaker ones because of the ban on secondary boycotts. Now, what the response of both AFL-CIO and Change to Win is the Employee Free Choice Act that's in the handout. And basically, I'm not going to, since you have the handout, I'm not even going to go over that except just to say that it addresses only the organizing side of this and getting a first contract. It does not address the problems with restrictions on the right to strike or on the right to act in solidarity. So it's a partial solution at best. Nevertheless, I have supported it in the past because it has been labor's bill. It's what the union leaders have agreed upon, and they've tried to mobilize the membership, and probably if it gets passed, things would be marginally better, and in some circumstances might make a big difference. But the thrust of what I want to communicate with you today is a critique of the Employee Free Choice Act from a long-term perspective. And I just came from the Solidarity panel, and one of the recurring themes in the Solidarity panel was that it's very hard to get people in the labor movement to think in the long term or conduct any kind of discussion at all. And this is obviously flying in the face of that. The labor movement right now is behind the Employee Free Choice Act as if that's going to solve it. It's as you want to be about it. What I want to suggest is that the labor movement moves forward on issues of workers' rights only when it acts like a rights movement, which is a pretty simple proposition.
Only when it acts like a what?
A rights movement. It has to act like, thank you, I probably swallowed my word. When it acts like a real rights movement, and not when it's simply trying to get the best bill that can be passed at any particular moment. So what I want to do is I want to compare the situation now with the campaign for EFCA, the Employee Free Choice Act, with the strategy and actions of the American labor movement in the early part of the 20th century, which is, incidentally, the period during which all of our major workers' rights statutes were passed. In other words, the movement must have been doing something right in the early 20th century. At least they moved forward tremendously. So I'm thinking maybe we can learn from them. And this activity was conducted not just by the left. This was one area in which the left and the conservative business unionists like Samuel Gompers were united. Even conservative business unionists like Gompers, Andrew Furuseth as a seaman, and so forth, were willing to appear outright unreasonable, uncompromising, and anti-corporate and critical when it came to workers' rights. They were willing to say some truly outrageous things. Okay, so what does a real rights movement do? And I've got three quick points on that. The first one is that you approach the struggle as a long-term struggle for fundamental principles and not wheeling and dealing for whatever bill can be achieved at a particular time. In the early part of the 20th century, the labor movement relied on the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which prohibits slavery and voluntary servitude, and claimed that the rights to organize and strike were protected under the 13th Amendment. That's because if you quit your job and you go from one non-union job into another job that's also a non-union job, you may have quit one relationship of servitude, but all you did was go into another one. So you're in involuntary servitude unless you can get out of the situation where the employer has unilateral control over the workplace. They claim the right to strike under this and said if your right to strike is restricted either by employers or by the government, then you're in involuntary servitude because your right to quit is no good to you. You can't actually influence conditions by quitting as an individual. All you do is, as Sam Domper said, you wander the streets alone. By contrast, EFCA is the latest in a series of labor reform bills. Every time the Democrats get a little something going, the labor movement comes out with a bill. We had the Labor Law Reform Bill of 1978. We had the Striker Replacement Bill of 1992 and 1994. And today we have EFCA. All of those were filibustered. Duh! The fact is that in this country we have an undemocratic system. We have a system in which New York, with 18 million people, has 2 senators, and so does Wyoming with 500 million people. Wyoming is in the other camp. It's easy to filibuster labor law reform. It happens only when workers are really mobilized. But the other thing about this lack of long-term perspective is that each one of these campaigns is disconnected from the others. So now you're fighting for labor law reform in 1978, then you're fighting for striker replacement in 92 to 94. Now we're fighting for EFCA. During the early part of the 20th century, the labor movement put forth a single platform. We have the rights to strike and to organize, and any restrictions on those are illegal and unconstitutional, and they stuck to that over a long period of time. Educating people so that eventually people in Congress, like Robert Wagner and Senator Norris of the Norris-LaGuardia Act, were repeating this and saying that restrictions on the right to strike and organize are involuntary servitude and slavery. We're getting nowhere on that. We're going here, we're going there, we're not building anything. Second is you pursue principles and not sound bites. Free choice, give me a break. Free choice slogan is neutral between union and non-union. Is that what we're talking about? Is that what the labor movement is talking about? That the government and the people should be neutral in the choice between employer tyranny and union work relations? That's not a slogan that can move us forward or that gets us anywhere. It brings to mind the market model of a rational consumer choosing whether to pay union dues or not. It's got nothing to do with the movement. The labor movement slogan in the past throughout the world has always been the freedom of association. It's the freedom to join together for mutual aid and solidarity, which is one of many connections between this panel and the last one. Finally, a real rights movement relies on the activity of the rank and file, not staff organizers. And it proceeds from an understanding of power coming up from the base, and not with the idea that you can manipulate things from the top. And in the first part of the 20th century, what really made an impression, I think, on people and convinced people that there was a crisis of workers' rights was that workers were exercising their rights in spite of restrictions against them, and they're doing that now. So, you know, this isn't something that has to happen. But the missing ingredient, what we don't have now, is that our labor leaders aren't backing them up. So you have transit workers in New York City, and they go out on strike. And they're guilty of a crime under New York law, under the Taylor Act. And we hear the union president, Toussaint, he says, our people are like Rosa Parks. Our people are like Martin Luther King. Well, where was the national labor leadership to come and back him up and say, we have the right to strike. Yes, we do. And you can't prohibit people from striking just because the government bought the subway system sometime back in the early 20th century. So what if they're public workers or private workers? They're transit workers, and without the right to strike, they can't get a fair shake. We need coming from the labor movement, an uncompromising attitude. And it's not even something that is a left isolating issue. It's something that people like Andy Stern ought to take up, because it's the kind of thing that you can do and be, shouldn't be pushing this here, but as a matter of real politics, this is important. You can be a business unionist and still take this point of view. It's about movement survival.
I'd like to introduce Sarah Jaraman, who's